Tonight, we begin a quiet journey into a world long forgotten by time. Far beyond the familiar tales of Egypt's pyramids or Rome's marble cities, there was once another empire, an empire of towering walls, endless wars, and shadows that still stretch across history. The Assyrian Empire, a realm where kings ruled with iron will, where cities of stone rose from the desert sands, and where ordinary people lived under constant strain and fear. Tonight, we won't speak of kings and conquests alone. Instead, we will slip softly into the quieter corners of this forgotten world, into the homes of commoners, into the dusty streets of ancient cities, into temples filled with flickering oil lamps, and into the quiet spaces where time itself seemed to slow. This is not a story of battles or glory. It is a story of daily life, of quiet endurance, of forgotten footsteps on sun-baked stone. And as we explore these distant lives, you may feel yourself drifting, slowly, gently, away from the present moment, letting your mind soften and wander into the calm rhythm of history, and toward the quiet comfort of sleep. Breathe deeply, settle in, and prepare to step softly into the forgotten world of the Assyrians. Now, let's begin. Welcome to my channel. This is the first episode in our series on the ancient world. Now close your eyes now, and imagine yourself waking before the sun has fully risen. The sky above is still soft and pale, tinged with the first traces of gold and gray. As the desert winds begin to stir, you are not a king, not a priest, not a scribe. You are something far more ordinary, a common subject of the mighty Assyrian Empire. Your house is small, made from sun-baked mud bricks stacked neatly but simply, with only a single room for your family to sleep and eat. Inside, the air is dry and thick with the scent of dust and old oil lamps. The floor beneath your feet is cool and uneven, a patchwork of worn stone and packed earth. As you rise, your back aches stiff from the thin reed mat that serves as your bed. Your joints already feel sore, because every day here begins in the same way, with labor. There is no such thing as leisure in your life, no such thing as rest, except in brief, stolen moments of sleep. Today, your first task is simple, but heavy. You must carry water from the river. The great Tigris, its waters brown and slow moving under the morning sun. You fill your clay jar at the river's edge and sling it onto your shoulder, its heavy rim biting into your skin. It is full to the brim. It feels like it will spill. You straighten the heavy jar on your back and begin the long, familiar walk toward home. Every step is slow and deliberate. The streets are narrow, crowded with others like you, each carrying their burdens in silence. There is little conversation here. The people are too tired, too weary from their labors. Only quiet shuffling footsteps, the occasional bleating of a goat, and the soft murmur of prayers whispered under one's breath. The city around you awakens. Fires crackle to life in simple ovens, smoke drifting lazily through the morning air. Merchants begin to lay out their goods: rough woolen cloth, simple pottery, small bundles of dates, and dried fish. You walk past them all, focused only on your task, on getting home, setting down your burden and resting a moment before the heat of the day arrives. And the weight of the empire presses down upon you in ways both visible and unseen. You are taxed heavily on the grain you grow, on the animals you raise, on nearly every aspect of your labor. If your jar is empty when the tax collector comes calling, he will not ask questions. He does not care if you have walked to the river and back. If your hands are blistered and sore, he wants what is owed. And punishment for missing your quota is swift and severe. A fine, perhaps, taken from your meager earnings. Or worse, a day in the stocks, exposed for all the city to see. Or even exile from the empire altogether, forced to wander the great roads with nothing but the clothes on your back. But such thoughts are for another day. For now, you walk, you shuffle along with the crowd until you reach your street. Then your house, your one small refuge in this vast, uncaring world. You unload your water jar and prepare for the rest of your day. Your tasks will vary depending on the season, on what the empire demands, on what your particular skills may be. Perhaps you are a farmer, raising grain and vegetables on the outskirts of the city, working long rows of land under the scorching sun. And as the weeks pass, you watch with growing anxiety as rains fail to come, turning the soil hard and cracked and forcing you to ration the little water you can still draw from the wells. Or perhaps you are a mason, helping to build another wall, another temple, another monument to the gods or the king, hauling stones up steep inclines, mixing cement, smoothing surfaces until your arms are stiff and sore and your hands are raw and bleeding. Either way, there is always another task, another wall, another temple, another monument to the gods or the king. Always more work to be done for the empire. You work alongside others, their faces sun-darkened and lined with fatigue. Some are free men, homeowners, fathers, brothers. Others are slaves, bought and sold, branded with hot irons, denied the right to roam freely or speak their minds. Here, under the sweltering sun, they toil side by side, bound together by their servitude to the empire. Sometimes you hear distant drums, or the faint clash of weapons from soldiers training beyond the city walls. Each boom of the drum, each ring of steel reminds you that this empire survives by conquest, that the riches which line the king's coffers and the temples are paid for in blood, and that anyone, at any time could be called to serve in the military, to fight for lands you will never see, to shed blood for kings you will never meet. As the sun begins to sink below the horizon, the city slowly quiets. The people return home, each bearing their own burdens, each dreaming of rest. Shadows stretch long across the streets, and the air cools just enough to breathe more easily. You make your way home, your muscles sore and heavy, your thoughts dulled by exhaustion. There is little to eat tonight. Perhaps a bit of bread, a bowl of lentils, some onions or dried fish if you are fortunate. You sit with your family in silence, the flicker of a small oil lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. Outside, beyond the reach of your door, the city remains still. Guards patrol the streets with slow, steady footsteps, watching for thieves or disobedience. In the distance, somewhere deep within the palace, priests chant quiet prayers to the gods, asking for protection, for victory, for the endless power of the Assyrian king. But their voices do not reach you here, and in the quiet of your home, you wonder, sometimes, if the kings ever think of you. The people who wake each morning, with only hunger in their bellies and calluses on their hands. Those who spend their days hauling water or grain, mending roofs or building walls, making leather sandals or weaving cloth. Do the kings ever wonder where their bread comes from? Who plants the grain they grind into flour? Who carries the stone they use to build their temples? Or do they think, perhaps, that these things simply appear, that the labor of countless men and women is somehow effortless, that the tribute they receive appears by magic? You lie down on your thin reed mat, your stomach growling softly in the darkness. Sleep comes quickly, but not without dreams. You dream of cool rivers and shaded groves, of banquets laden with food and fine garments, of silver coins and precious jewels. You dream of freedom. Then the rooster crows, the oil lamp sputters, and you wake to the first light of dawn, ready to begin the same tasks, to walk the same streets, to live another day under the endless gaze of the Assyrian king. This is life for a commoner in the Assyrian Empire, a rhythm of survival beneath the towering shadow of kings and gods. Will you survive a day in the Assyrian Empire? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more historical tales, including the next installment in this series. Would you survive a day in the Ottoman Empire? Welcome back, everyone. Today we're back in the ancient world, but this time we're traveling to the Empire of Assyria. Today we will learn what it was like to be conquered by one of the most feared men who ever lived. Learn about the things that the Ottomans destroyed in their path and see how one king kept the greatest secret of all time. As always, viewer discretion is advised for this episode as some of this information may be offensive or disturbing. We, the makers of this show, in no way support or condone the actions of the subjects featured. Now, sit back, relax, and get ready to find out why you wouldn't survive a day in the Assyrian Empire. Segment 2. The Ruthless Reign of Ashurbanipal, King of Kings. And now, let us step softly into another part of the Assyrian world, this time, not among commoners or laborers, but within the stone walls of the royal palace itself, behind tall, carved doors, beneath ceilings painted with stars and winged spirits, there lived a man whose name once struck fear into every corner of the known world. Ashurbanipal, King of Kings, the last great ruler of Assyria. His reign began in the shadow of blood and ambition. Born as a younger son of the king, he was not expected to rule, but fate, and perhaps quiet calculation, would guide him elsewhere. Ashurbanipal was unlike the kings before him. He was no mere warrior king, though he knew well the art of war. He was a scholar, a reader of omens, a collector of wisdom. It is said that he could read the ancient cuneiform signs, etched carefully onto soft clay tablets. Well, most kings had scribes do such work for them, but make no mistake, beneath this quiet love of knowledge lay a ruler as ruthless as any. In Assyria's long, harsh history, he watched patiently as his elder brother took the throne of Babylon, the other great city of the empire, and he waited as tensions simmered between them. When the time was right, Ashurbanipal struck with cold precision. His armies marched swiftly, laying siege to cities that defied him, tearing down walls and burning palaces to ash. His brother was captured, and his fate was sealed within the darkness of the palace dungeons. Ashurbanipal reigned supreme. Under his rule, the Assyrian Empire reached its greatest height. The streets of Nineveh filled with tribute, gold, silver, spices, and slaves from distant lands. Conquered kings bowed before him, and in his palace, he ordered great stone reliefs carved, depicting his victories in slow, meticulous detail. But even amid his triumphs, Ashurbanipal remained ever watchful, ever wary of threats from beyond the horizon. He gathered knowledge as others gathered gold. His great library grew day by day. Thousands of clay tablets, etched with prayers, poems, spells, and histories. Here, in these quiet chambers, the epic of Gilgamesh slept beneath layers of dust and time. Yet, even the greatest kings cannot stop the turning of the world. Toward the end of his reign, Ashurbanipal faced rebellions from every side. Enemies at the gates, allies turning cold and distant. Within the palace, the whisper of betrayal grew louder, and though his power remained vast, the cracks began to show. In time, Ashurbanipal vanished from the record, his death quiet, unmarked by grand ceremony. The empire he had ruled, so vast, so mighty, would crumble not long after his passing. Now, his name lingers only in fragments etched in fading lines of cuneiform, half remembered in stories told beneath dim museum lights. And somewhere, buried deep in the sands, his library waits, its tablets still sleeping in the quiet of forgotten time. And now, let us step deeper still into the hidden mysteries of this ancient world. Are you almost done learning about the Assyrian Empire? Let me know if you are by dropping a comment below. And while you're there, please make sure you hit that subscribe button because we have lots more videos coming your way. Also, we want to thank our supporters for supporting this channel. If you'd like to help us keep making awesome videos, check out the link in the description below. Now, moving on. Segment 3. The destruction of the Kingdom of Israel. The Assyrian conquest of the Kingdom of Israel is a significant event in the ancient Near East. It marked the beginning of the end for the kingdom, leading ultimately to its exile and the destruction of its capital, Samaria. The key player in this story is the mighty Assyrian Empire. By the 8th century BC, the Assyrians were a formidable force, renowned for their military prowess and their ability to project power across vast distances. Their army was a well-oiled machine, disciplined and equipped with advanced weaponry for the time, including chariots, iron weapons, and siege engines. They also employed psychological warfare, terrorizing their enemies before and during battle to demoralize them. On the other side, we have the Kingdom of Israel, also known as the Northern Kingdom to distinguish it from the Kingdom of Judah in the south. At this point in history, the Israelites had been ruled by a succession of kings following the division of Solomon's empire. However, the kingdom was politically unstable, with frequent changes in leadership and a constant threat of attack from neighboring nations. The Assyrian campaign against Israel was part of a larger imperial project, aimed at controlling strategic trade routes and securing raw materials. The Assyrians coveted the resources of the Levant region, which included the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. The conquest started with threats and demands. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser V sent messengers to the Israeli kings demanding submission and tribute. However, when the tribute wasn't to his liking or when certain conditions were not met, the Assyrians attacked. They came in force, overwhelming the Israelites with their military superiority. Israeli cities were sacked, their countryside ravaged. The Assyrians took captives and killed many, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The siege of Samaria, the capital of Israel, is a particularly grim episode in this story. The city held out for 3 years, but eventually fell to the Assyrians. It was completely destroyed, its people exiled to Media and its territory incorporated into the Assyrian Empire. This event had profound consequences for the Jewish people. The destruction of the Northern Kingdom marked a turning point in their history. It led to a cultural and religious transformation with the surviving kingdoms of Judah and Israel eventually becoming a single entity under the rule of the Davidic dynasty. For the Assyrians, the conquest of Israel was a significant victory that added to their growing empire. It demonstrated their military strength and their ability to dominate their neighbors. However, as with all empires, the Assyrian hold over their vast territories was not uncontested. Rebellions and revolts were common, and the Assyrian forces were constantly engaged in suppressing them. Today, the story of the Assyrian conquest of Israel is remembered through various historical accounts, including the books of Kings and Chronicles in the Hebrew Bible. These accounts provide a first-hand perspective on the event, highlighting the human cost and the lasting impact it had on the Jewish people. Archaeological findings have also shed light on this period, providing material evidence to complement the biblical narrative. Discoveries such as fallen city walls, broken household items, and personal belongings lost during the upheaval have given a tangible form to this pivotal moment in history. As we reflect on this dark chapter of history, we remember not just the destruction and exile, but also the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit. The story of the Assyrian conquest of Israel is a reminder of the complexities of the past and the need to understand and learn from it. As we move forward, do you think you would have survived the Assyrian Empire? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to stay tuned for more videos like this one. See you next time. Nineveh's library has become a thing of legend, a place where entire worlds of thought have been held captive in clay and fire for millennia, a realm of forgotten voices. It's amazing to think about all the knowledge we can recover from that time. But what would it actually have been like to visit? How did this treasure survive for so long? And what other mysteries does it hold? Welcome to this channel, and today, let us journey back in time, back to the heart of the ancient world, where towering palaces cast long shadows and the whispers of forgotten gods still linger in the wind. Let us wander into the lost realms of the Assyrian Empire, where might made right and the king was God on earth. Let us start our tale in the mighty city of Nineveh, for Nineveh was no ordinary city. It was the beating heart of an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, where the sun beat down fiercely and the rivers ran thick with life and trade. But while its markets teemed with merchants and its temples soared towards the heavens, Nineveh had a secret, a shadow lurking in its midst. For hidden deep within the heart of the palace complex, far from the bustling crowds, there lay a place of quiet power, the royal library, guarded by stern-faced priests and scribes, where the very essence of the empire was held captive in clay and fire. Imagine stepping through the heavy wooden doors, leaving the noise and heat of the city behind and entering a world of hushed voices and rustling scrolls. The air is thick with the scent of cedar wood and papyrus, and the only sound is the scratching of quills on clay tablets. Here, knowledge was power, every tablet carefully pressed with the sharp edge of a stylus, bearing the ancient, curling lines of cuneiform script. There are thousands upon thousands of them, stacked high on shelves that line the walls from floor to ceiling. The sheer volume of information contained within those fragile tablets is staggering, a testament to the vast reach and insatiable curiosity of the Assyrian Empire. The library held everything, from practical texts on agriculture and law to philosophical treatises and epic poems. There were historical records, scientific observations, religious hymns, all painstakingly recorded on clay and stored here for safekeeping. In the days before printing, such a collection was unparalleled, a treasure trove of human thought and discovery unmatched anywhere else in the ancient world. But it was more than just a storehouse of knowledge. The library was a living, breathing entity, constantly growing, changing and evolving. Scribes would work day and night to copy new texts, translate foreign languages, and add to the ever-growing collection. Scholars and students would come from all over the empire to study here, eager to learn from the accumulated wisdom of generations past. The library was a hub of intellectual activity, a place where ideas were exchanged, debated, and refined. It was here that the great epic of Gilgamesh was found, etched across many fragile tablets, each one resting in quiet patience for centuries, untouched. Scholars believe there were once over 30,000 tablets in this place. So many thoughts, so many voices, carefully preserved in the hush of fired clay. But time moves slowly, and it shows no mercy. When Nineveh fell and the empire crumbled into dust, the fires came, palaces were looted, walls toppled, and yet the library endured in its own quiet way. The flames hardened the clay tablets even further, preserving them in their final form. Centuries passed, the sands gathered, the winds swept over the ruins, and the library simply waited until one day in the 19th century, curious hands brushed away the dust, revealing the ancient words beneath. The tablets emerged slowly, carefully, one by one, their symbols faint but still legible. And so the secrets of Nineveh's library began to be revealed, offering us a glimpse into a world long gone. Today, many of those tablets rest in distant museums, locked behind glass, their secrets revealed, and yet still somehow out of reach. For there are many tablets still unread, their meanings uncertain, languages lost, symbols broken, stories fragmented, and perhaps somewhere, buried still beneath the quiet earth of Nineveh, there remain untouched shelves, forgotten rooms, and words yet to be spoken aloud. If you listen closely now, you might almost hear them, the soft whisper of ancient scribes, the faint brush of clay against clay, the quiet pulse of thoughts left behind, waiting, always waiting. And while these silent halls may seem like a relic of the past, a mere footnote in history, they offer us a profound lesson in the power of knowledge and the fragility of civilization. For here in the heart of Nineveh, where once the wheels of empire turned, we find ourselves confronted with the impermanence of human achievement and the enduring spirit of curiosity and discovery. This lost library reminds us that even the greatest empires can crumble to dust, and that the pursuit of knowledge, though vital to our progress, is a precarious endeavor. It also reminds us of the importance of preserving our cultural heritage and protecting our shared history from the ravages of time and conflict. For who knows what treasures lie buried beneath the sands of time, waiting to be unearthed and understood. As we stand among the silent shelves of Nineveh, let us remember that we are part of a long and unbroken chain of learners, each generation building on the knowledge and discoveries of those who came before. Let us honor the legacy of the Assyrian Empire by embracing the values of scholarship, tolerance, and mutual understanding. And let us strive to create a world where knowledge is valued, diversity is celebrated, and peace prevails. So next time you find yourself surrounded by the bounty of knowledge, take a moment to appreciate the countless individuals who have dedicated their lives to the pursuit of learning. And remember the silent scholars of Nineveh whose whispers echo through the ages, urging us to seek out the truth and cherish the fragility of our shared humanity. Now it's your turn. What would you love to know that might be hiding in the ancient world? What mysteries would you explore if you could travel back in time? Share your thoughts below and let the spirit of discovery guide you. Who knows what treasures of knowledge await your discovery? In this series, I bring history to life with immersive experiences. And today, we find ourselves in the 7th century BCE, in the heart of the mighty Assyrian Empire. You are a traveler from a distant land who has arrived in the capital city of Ashur. You've heard tales of its grandeur and wealth, but nothing could have prepared you for the reality. Before we begin, please make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the release of our first interactive special, which will be premiering very soon. And be sure to check out the links in the description below for more ways to connect with us. Now let us begin. Now, let us step away from the dusty streets, the fields of toil, and the crowded quarters of common life. Instead, we drift toward the higher terraces, the inner courts of stone and shadow, where only the privileged may walk. Here the air feels cooler, sweetened by the scent of imported oils and crushed herbs laid upon the breeze. You are no longer a laborer now. Tonight you are among the Assyrian elite. As you move down the road, your eyes adjust to the dimmer light. Gone are the lamp posts with their brazen flames that illuminate the common folk's busy thoroughfares. In their place are rows of bronze lanterns hanging from brackets on palace walls, each one carefully shielded so passers-by cannot extinguish them. Their glow mingles with the starlight filtering through the leaves of exotic trees, growing in carefully tended gardens. Now you pass through towering stone gateways guarded by great winged bulls, their eyes watching silently as you move beneath their gaze. Beyond these gates, the world changes. The grand halls of the palace stretch before you, supported by columns carved with mythical creatures and the likenesses of former rulers. The walls here are carved with scenes of kings in triumph, hunters in lush forests, and gods bestowing their favor from the heavens. Between these reliefs are windows set with stained glass that cast dancing shards of colored light upon the polished floors. As you continue on, you pass into a courtyard where fountains spray into shallow pools, their surfaces reflecting the beauty of the glazed brickwork that surrounds them. Turning toward the source of the cascading water, you see a magnificent garden separated from the court by a low wall. Within its confines, narrow paths wind between fragrant flower beds, past statues of gods and mythical beasts. At the center stands a pool fed by a fountain in its midst. A marble pavilion offers shade to weary travelers and nobles alike. From here, the sound of a harp drifts to your ears, beckoning you forward. Drawn by the music, you follow its melody until you come upon a group of women seated gracefully upon cushioned chairs. One of them, her face veiled, strums a harp while the others sway gently, their voices blending in harmonious thirds. You pass through another gateway, this time ornamented with lions and palm trees, each detail meticulously crafted to delight the eye. Beyond it lies a vast reception hall where servants bustle about readying couches and side tables. The floors are tiled with bright colors, deep blues, soft golds, patterns that seem to shimmer in the flickering light of bronze lamps. These designs were created not only to be admired, but also to amplify the dim oil lamp light, transforming it into a spectacle of color. Among the throng of servants, You notice a young man of noble bearing adjusting a purple curtain. With a slight nod, he motions to a seat at the far end of the room, indicating for you to be seated. Upon settling onto the plush cushions, you are presented with a wooden box filled with fresh dates, pomegranates, and figs. From another, you are offered a delicate silver cup filled with rich, dark wine. As you partake in these offerings, your eyes adjust to the dim lighting and you take in the opulence that surrounds you. Each chamber opens to the next in a continuous flow of marble columns, inlaid floors, and textured wall panels. You marvel at the artistry evident everywhere. The vibrant tiles, the intricate relief work, and the vibrant tapestries adorning every wall. While you relax, servants move softly around you, barefoot upon cool stone. Soon, you are served a meal fit for royalty. Platters piled high with roasted lamb seasoned with imported spices, loaves of sesame seed cake, fresh fish from far-off rivers, and sweet wine mixed with herbs and syrups. The rooms are wide and open, with high ceilings that seem to stretch endlessly above. After your meal, you are led through archways draped with silk to a tranquil garden. Palm trees sway gently overhead, their fronds forming a mosaic of light and shadow upon the ground. Beneath them, you stroll along a paved path that leads to a pool fed by a nearby fountain. Upon reaching the water's edge, you pause to admire the lilies and other exotic flowers that bloom in profusion. You return to the palace, drawn by the sound of singing. Following the melody, you enter a large hall where men and women dance gracefully to the rhythm of drums and lutes. Couples whirl about, their laughter echoing through the chamber as they twirl and dip in perfect unison. It is then that you notice a beautiful woman standing apart from the revelers, her eyes fixed on the dancers, a gentle smile gracing her lips. Drawn to her elegance, you approach and introduce yourself. She responds with a warm welcome, inviting you to join her in appreciating the performance. As the evening progresses, she engages you in conversation, revealing her wit and intelligence, and you find yourself captivated by her charm. You and the lady continue exploring the palace together, discovering secret passageways, intimate gardens, and moonlit courtyards. As the night deepens, you feel a sense of contentment and wonder at the beauty that surrounds you. Then, as the sky begins to lighten with the approach of dawn, you realize that your time here is drawing to a close. With a heavy heart, you bid farewell to the lady, promising to cherish the memory of your encounter. As you depart the palace, you carry with you the lingering scent of gardenias and the echo of laughter, knowing that your experience in Asher will forever be a treasure. In your brief time in the city, you have glimpsed the heights of luxury and pleasure. You've dined on the finest foods, strolled through moonlit gardens, and danced with the most beautiful women. But all of this was just a taste of what the Assyrian nobility had to offer. For if you were to truly live like them, you would need to understand the constant pressures, the ever-present dangers, and the relentless pursuit of power that defined their lives. The court was a world unto itself, a microcosm of society where the rules and customs were as rigid as the palace walls. Every action, word, and gesture had to be carefully considered, for it could impact your standing within the court. You would be surrounded by rivals and enemies who would stop at nothing to advance their own interests, whether through marriage alliances, political machinations, or even assassination. Even the king's favor could turn on a whim, leaving you stripped of your power and influence. Despite these dangers, the lure of power, wealth, and prestige was too strong to resist. So you would find yourself drawn into the maelstrom of courtly life, where the stakes were high and the competition was fierce. You would learn the delicate art of diplomacy, mastering the subtle nuances of language and body language to protect your interests. Every banquet and party would be a minefield of intrigue, where the casual observer could easily offend or make powerful enemies. You would need to cultivate a network of informants to keep tabs on your rivals and stay one step ahead of them. And you would have to be ready at a moment's notice to defend your honor in a duel, where the clash of steel would determine your status in the court. Your days would be filled with endless ceremonies and rituals, from paying homage to the king to attending religious festivals. You would need to memorize the proper etiquette for each occasion, lest you commit some faux pas that would bring shame upon yourself and your family. At night, you would retire to chambers filled with luxury and comfort, surrounded by the finest fabrics, furniture, and artwork. But even here, you would not be safe, for the palace walls were also home to jealous lovers, vengeful servants, and power-hungry courtiers who saw your success as a threat to their own ambitions. You might wake to the sound of screams in the night, the clash of weapons, or the roar of a disgruntled lion from the royal menagerie. Your nights would be restless, knowing that your enemies were plotting in the shadows, waiting for you to falter so they could pounce. All of this would be the price of living the lavish lifestyle of the Assyrian nobility, a world of privilege and power, but also danger and intrigue. It would be a life of constant struggle, where the victors wrote the history books and the losers were forgotten. So perhaps it's better to be just a traveler, catching only a glimpse of this gilded cage and leaving before the bars close. Or maybe you decide to stay and try your luck at navigating the treacherous waters of the Assyrian court. Either way, your journey here has been nothing short of extraordinary. The Assyrian Empire, known for its unparalleled military prowess, ruthlessness, and brutality, existed from around 1900 BC to 609 BC. However, they were not just successful because they were warlike and violent. They had more advantages than their enemies. Are you curious to know what these advantages were? If yes, stay with us till the end. We'll tell you about one of the most extreme religions that could turn even a god against his own worshippers. Gods of war. The unyielding faith of the Assyrians. The Assyrians worshipped many gods, but their most prominent deity was Ashurnasirpal, a warrior god whose name meant the light of Nasaba. He was usually depicted as a fierce bull, signifying strength and power, or as a warrior wearing a horned hat and holding a bow and arrow. This image of Ashurnasirpal encapsulated the essence of Assyrian culture, a society that thrived on war and conquest. Assyrian religion was polytheistic and heavily influenced by their experiences and interactions with neighboring civilizations like the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Hittites. They believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses who resided on Mount Safan, the highest peak in the Middle East, and regularly interacted with humanity. Many of their gods were associated with natural phenomena, such as the weather, seasons, and celestial bodies. For example, the goddess Ishtar was linked to the planet Venus, and the god Nabu was considered the personificati of wisdom and writing. The Assyrians also had underworld deities such as Nergal, the god of the underworld, and Zamama, the goddess of night. However, despite the variety of gods and goddesses they worshipped, there was one central figure who stood out above all others, Ashurnasirpal II. Unlike many other Mesopotamian cultures at the time, the Assyrians did not view their gods as distant, ethereal beings, but rather as active participants in human affairs. They saw themselves as the chosen people of Ashurnasirpal and believed that their military victories and territorial expansion were direct results of his favor. As mentioned earlier, Ashurnasirpal was a formidable deity often depicted as a powerful warrior, which reflected the militaristic nature of Assyrian society. The Assyrians believed that their king was a direct descendant of Ashurnasirpal, and as such, he was considered the embodiment of the god on earth. This belief placed enormous pressure on the shoulders of the Assyrian kings, who were expected to live up to the godlike standards set by their divine ancestor. Kings like Ashurnasirpal II and Tiglath-Pileser III took this responsibility seriously, ruling with an iron fist and leading their armies to victory in numerous battles. But it wasn't just brute force that made the Assyrians successful. Their empire was also built on a foundation of cunning diplomacy and strategic alliances. They understood the importance of playing one kingdom against another and used this knowledge to their advantage, expanding their influence throughout the region. One of the most impressive aspects of the Assyrian Empire was its ability to adapt and evolve over time. As the empire grew, so did the sophistication of its religious practices. Instead of relying solely on military might, Assyrian kings began to embrace cultural assimilation, adopting the customs and traditions of the people they conquered. This policy of cultural exchange helped to integrate the vast empire and create a sense of unity among the diverse population. Despite the grandeur and success of the Assyrian Empire, it ultimately met a tragic end. Internal strife and external pressures led to the decline and eventual fall of the empire in 609 BC. However, the legacy of the Assyrians, both their military achievements and their unique religious beliefs, continued to live on in the ancient world long after their empire had fallen. Their influence can be seen in the art, architecture, and religious practices of later Mesopotamian cultures, serving as a reminder of their enduring impact on human history. The rise of the warrior king. When you think of the greatest empires ever, chances are you picture mighty armies, legendary generals, and epic tales of warfare. And if you're thinking this way, you've probably got it right. Because let's face it, most of the greatest empires in history didn't come to power by being pacifists. No, they established their dominance through sheer military might and unyielding ambition. But here's the thing. It's not just about having a strong army or conquering new lands. It's also about how you govern those lands, how you treat your subjects, and how you shape your empire for future generations. One of the most fascinating examples of this is the rise of the warrior king, a common thread in many ancient societies. In the world of the ancient Assyrians, being a king wasn't just a title, it was a divine mandate. From the moment they stepped into power, they weren't just ruling over people, they were carrying the weight of the gods themselves. And let's talk about the king who embodied this idea like no other, the one and only Ashurnasirpal II. This guy wasn't your average ruler. Sure, he expanded the Assyrian Empire to places nobody thought possible, but it's how he carried himself that truly captured the spirit of the warrior king. When you look at the inscriptions he left behind, the stories he told of his conquests, you can see a man driven by something bigger than himself. He wasn't just fighting for land or power, he was doing it for the glory of Ashurnasirpal, the god of war, and he wasn't afraid to show it. Now, don't get me wrong, Ashurnasirpal II was no saint. His reign was marked by brutal tactics and swift punishments, but that was just part of his story. He wasn't trying to win hearts and minds, he was focused on results, on crushing his enemies and securing his empire. And in doing so, he created a legacy that lived on for centuries. He showed what it meant to be a warrior king, not just in deeds, but in attitude, in the way he saw himself and how he wanted to be remembered. Ashurnasirpal II's story gives us a window into a world where gods and kings walked hand in hand, where every battle was a test of faith and where every victory was a step towards immortality. It reminds us that history is more than just dates and battles. It's a story of people, their beliefs and the choices they made. Here's the kicker. This whole warrior king thing wasn't limited to just one place or time. It popped up again and again in different parts of the world, each with its own flavor, but all united by the same idea of divine duty and unwavering focus on conquest. So next time you think about history's greatest empires, remember the warrior king, the driving force that shaped entire civilizations and left an everlasting mark on our collective past. Cities of the desert sand step back in time with us to the days when sand dunes stretched as far as the eye could see and the scorching sun beat down on the ancient world. Picture this. You're wandering through bustling cities that seem straight out of a dream, filled with sights and sounds that will make your jaw drop. We're talking about the magnificent Nineveh and Nimrud, two cities that were once the crown jewels of the Assyrian Empire. Now, Nineveh was more than just a city. It was a sprawling metropolis that put most modern cities to shame. Imagine wide streets lined with elegant houses, bustling marketplaces overflowing with exotic goods and towering palaces fit for a king. And let's not forget the Library of Nineveh, a treasure trove of ancient knowledge that would make any bookworm drool. As for Nimrud, it was the kind of place where history came alive. The ruins of ancient walls still stand tall, whispering tales of a glorious past. You can almost feel the echoes of merchants haggling in the marketplace or hear the clink of tools in the workshops of skilled artisans. But here's the twist. These cities weren't just centers of trade and culture. They were military hubs that played a vital role in the Assyrian Empire's rise to power. And let's not forget the architectural marvels that graced these cities. From the awe-inspiring Ishtar Gate to the intricate carvings adorning the palaces, every structure was a testament to the creativity and skill of the Assyrian people. Sadly, these magnificent cities fell into ruin, leaving us with nothing but fragments of their former glory. But hey, at least we have the stories, don't we? Stories that transport us back in time, to when the desert sands were home to some of the most remarkable cities in history. And hey, if you're still with us, why not show your support? Your encouragement means the world to us and keeps us motivated to bring more crazy history to your feed. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride through time. Until next time, stay curious, stay thirsty for knowledge, and never stop exploring the past. Who knows what treasures of history we'll uncover next? Imagine you survived a fall from a tower, only to find yourself amidst a raging battle between two superpowers, where your life expectancy is measured in seconds. Now picture this happening daily, not just in movies, but in real life. Welcome to the Assyrian Empire, where the odds of survival were slim, even for the most cautious individuals. Let us explore why you would last a day in this ancient empire known for its military prowess and imposing cities. But before we dive into the world of the Assyrians, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on our latest videos. About all aspects of history, the towering cities of stone and clay, the Assyrian Empire was a formidable force in the ancient world, controlling a vast territory that spanned from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Founded in the 19th century BC, it reached its peak during the reigns of kings Ashurnasirpal II, Tiglath-Pileser III, and Sennacherib. The empire boasted impressive infrastructure, including towering mud brick walls that protected their major cities. These walls weren't just defensive structures, they were symbols of the Assyrian king's power and the empire's prosperity. The capital city of Ashur was one such testament to their might, with its massive double walls standing up to 50 feet tall and featuring intricate fortifications like round towers and guard chambers. The outer wall alone was a remarkable feat of engineering, stretching over 25 miles and equipped with over 200 watchtowers, each housing soldiers ready to defend the city from any threat. In fact, the entire empire was dotted with similarly imposing cities like Nimrud, Calhu, and Nineveh. These urban centers were not only fortified, but also served as administrative, religious, and commercial hubs, reflecting the sophistication of the Assyrian civilization. However, if you were a traveler in this time period, these very structures could have been your downfall, even if you managed to avoid the battles between empires and the frequent rebellions within the vast empire. Simply traversing through the crowded streets of these cities could have proven fatal. For instance, in the bustling city of Ashur, with its dense population living within the protective walls, you would have had to navigate narrow alleyways and crowded marketplaces, always at risk of being caught in the crossfire of a sudden dispute or worse, targeted by thieves or assassins. Moreover, sanitation was a major challenge in these cities. With limited waste disposal systems and a lack of basic hygiene practices, the streets would often be filled with waste and the remnants of everyday life, not to mention the constant presence of animals, including livestock and the occasional wild animal that managed to make its way inside the city walls, further contributing to the unsanitary conditions. In such an environment, even the most routine activities could turn into a deadly affair. A simple trip to the market for provisions or a stroll through the city to admire its grandeur could end in disaster. For example, if you were unfortunate enough to be caught in a stampede at a public event or a riot due to the oppressive rule of the Assyrians, you wouldn't stand a chance of survival. Furthermore, the constant threat of natural disasters loomed large. Floods were a common occurrence, especially during the spring thaws and summer rains, which could quickly transform the bustling streets into treacherous waters, trapping or drowning unsuspecting citizens. The heat, particularly during the summers, was unbearable, often leading to dehydration and heat stroke. If you weren't prepared or couldn't seek shelter, the unforgiving sun could easily claim your life. Ancient warfare, a grim reality. Life in the Assyrian Empire was not just perilous. Within the city walls, venturing outside meant confronting the empire's military machine, which was renowned for its brutality and efficiency. During its peak, the Assyrian army was considered the most powerful in the ancient world. Known for its discipline, organization, and sheer strength, it employed innovative tactics and utilized an array of weaponry that would strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. Assyrian soldiers were well trained and equipped with advanced weaponry for their time, including iron weapons, chariots, and horses. They also developed siege engines like battering rams and catapults to break through enemy defenses. The introduction of ironworking technology gave them a significant edge, enabling them to produce stronger and more durable weapons and armor. This military superiority allowed the Assyrians to expand their empire aggressively, conquering vast territories and subjugating numerous city-states and kingdoms. However, for anyone caught in their path, it meant a terrifying ordeal. Assyrian warfare was characterized by extreme violence and cruelty. Their military campaigns were as much about instilling terror as achieving strategic objectives. When faced with resistance, they would resort to scorched earth tactics, burning cities, killing their inhabitants, and destroying crops and infrastructure. Even surrendering cities were not spared, as the Assyrians viewed any opposition as a threat that needed to be eliminated. To understand the horrors you would have faced, consider the fate of the city of Semitism. In 663 BC, the Assyrians besieged the city, subjecting its inhabitants to unimaginable atrocities. After capturing the city, they slaughtered the men, women, and children, leaving none alive except for a small group that was sold into slavery. Such was the fate of many cities throughout the Assyrian Empire, making any journey outside the city walls a risky gamble with life itself. The brutal reality of war meant that even if you managed to flee the chaos of an Assyrian city, your chances of survival were slim. Evading the army's notice was nearly impossible, as they employed advanced scouting and surveillance techniques, utilizing spies, informants, and aerial observation to gather intelligence. Once spotted, you would have been pursued relentlessly until captured. Captives usually faced torture, forced labor, or even death. Moreover, the Assyrian Empire's vastness made escaping its clutches extremely difficult. Fleeing south could lead you into the deserts of Arabia or Mesopotamia, where you'd face scorching heat, scarce resources, and the risk of being lost forever. Heading north might take you into unfamiliar territories inhabited by hostile tribes or dangerous wild animals, and attempting to navigate around the empire's borders could result in crossing treacherous mountains or dense forests, both equally challenging and perilous. With limited maps or guides, getting lost was a real possibility, leaving you stranded and vulnerable in an uncharted wilderness. Survival and rebellion. Despite these grim realities, life still went on in the Assyrian Empire. Markets bustled with merchants from distant lands, temples resonated with prayers to their gods, and construction projects continued, each building adding to the empire's grandeur. However, under this seemingly prosperous surface, discontent was brewing. The harsh rule of the Assyrian kings, including their use of forced labor and exploitation of conquered peoples, led to widespread resentment. As the empire expanded, so did the burden on its subjects. Tribute demands, coupled with the excessive taxation, drained the resources of the populace, leaving them impoverished and desperate. To make matters worse, the Assyrians implemented a system of forced labor, conscripting men to work on construction projects or serve in the military, often at the cost of their own safety and well-being. Rebellions were not uncommon, but the Assyrian military machine was usually quick to crush them. Despite the hardships, life in the Assyrian Empire continued. Religious rituals and festivals were celebrated, literature flourished, and advancements in science and mathematics were made. Yet the shadow of war and oppression loomed over every aspect of life, reminding everyone of the precarious balance between prosperity and destruction. For example, the rebellion of the city-state of Urartu against Assyrian rule showcases the tension between the empire's power and its subjects' resistance. Urartian rulers, seeking independence from Assyrian domination, led a revolt that lasted for years, demonstrating the limits of Assyrian control and the determination of their subjects to defy oppression. So if you were to find yourself in the Assyrian Empire, it wouldn't just be the towering walls and mighty armies you'd have to contend with. The simmering discontent among the populace, coupled with the heavy-handed rule of the Assyrian kings, would mean that even surviving a day outside the walls would be a monumental task. A world transformed by conquest. As we conclude our exploration of the Assyrian Empire, it's essential to recognize the profound impact it had on the ancient world. The empire's legacy, though often overshadowed by its contemporaries like the Babylonians and Persians, was equally significant in shaping the course of history. The Assyrians' contributions to literature, art, and architecture left an indelible mark on the cultures that followed. Their innovative approach to governance, including the establishment of provincial systems and the codification of laws, influenced the development of later empires. Moreover, the Assyrian Empire's vast trade network facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices across vast distances, fostering interconnectedness that transcended geographical boundaries. Yet, it was the empire's military prowess that truly set it apart. The Assyrian army's tactical brilliance and strategic acumen are studied to this day, serving as a case study in military history. Their approach to logistics, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare remains a subject of fascination for military strategists. However, it's important to acknowledge the darker aspects of their military legacy: the brutality, the oppression, and the destruction that accompanied their conquests. The Assyrian Empire's insatiable desire for power and its willingness to employ extreme measures to achieve its objectives serve as a reminder of the destructive potential of unchecked ambition. In conclusion, the Assyrian Empire stands as a testament to the complexities of ancient civilizations. It was a society that achieved remarkable feats of organization, infrastructure, and military strategy, yet was marred by the excesses of its rulers and the suffering it inflicted on its subjects. Understanding the Assyrian Empire not only enriches our knowledge of the ancient world, but also offers a timeless lesson in the pursuit of power and the importance of balance and restraint in governance. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more captivating historical tales. Until next time, keep exploring the past and stay curious. Assyria is one of history's most brutal empires, but it wasn't just its military might that made it so formidable. It was also a well-oiled machine of governance and logistics, and if you were an outsider, you would have found it almost impossible to survive there. Hey, everyone. Today we're going to look at 3 reasons why you wouldn't survive a day in the Assyrian Empire. From how they dealt with traders to what might have happened if you had been caught in the desert, without food or water. First, though, Let me explain how the empire worked. The Assyrian Empire was located in what is today northern Iraq, parts of Turkey, eastern Syria, and western Iran. Their capital city was Ashur and later Nineveh. But unlike other empires of the ancient world, their land wasn't very fertile. While they did have some good farmland along the banks of rivers like the Tigris and Euphrates, much of their territory was arid and dry. Now this led them to become one of the greatest trading empires of the ancient world, because in order to get things like grain and timber, they needed to establish long-distance trade routes. So instead of getting those resources themselves, they focused on gathering silver, gold, and precious stones, which they then traded for what they needed. The problem was that to protect these trade routes and their empire, they built a large army, and that required lots of logistics to keep it fed and supplied. And to solve that problem, they created a system of roads and rest stops, basically making their own version of the Pony Express, except with horses and chariots instead of bikes. They called it a wagon road, and each station had supplies that travelers could use if they broke down, along with a place for them to stay the night. In fact, there are records of travelers paying taxes to stay in these stations, so even if your chariot broke down, you still had to pay to stay there. Otherwise, you could just be thrown out into the desert to die. But why do we know so much about these wagon roads? Well, it was thanks to a secret police force called the Medes. This leads us into our first reason you wouldn't survive a day in the Assyrian Empire. When the Assyrian king wanted to expand his empire, he would first send out scouts to see if the people living there had already paid their tribute. And if they hadn't, the Medes would make sure that they did. And they didn't beat around the bush either. If someone refused to pay tribute, they would simply kill them and take their stuff. Or if someone was spreading rumors that were hurting the empire, they would also kill them. One time they killed 27 people for spreading false rumors that the Assyrian king had gone insane. To make things worse, they didn't even need hard evidence. Suspicion was enough for them to make an arrest. And even if you weren't guilty, you still wouldn't get off scot-free. They were also tasked with protecting the king on his diplomatic missions. And if anything bad happened to him, they would question everyone until someone confessed. And sometimes that meant torturing innocent people until they gave up the name of the real culprit. But it wasn't just your life that was in danger. Your family's life was also in danger. If you were accused of doing something wrong, the Medes would bring you and your entire family to the king. And once they got there, they would bind your hands behind your back and pull your hair to make sure that you looked as miserable as possible. Then while you're sitting there helpless, they would tell your family that if they could prove you were innocent, then you would be set free. But what they were really doing was trying to make your family confess for you. Because if they did, then they could save themselves by sacrificing you. Now, this only worked if you weren't actually guilty, though, if you were, then your family would confess alongside you, and all of you would suffer the same fate. If you couldn't come up with anyone, then you were usually tortured until you confessed. And that means that not only could you go to jail for something you didn't do, but also get the person you love the most killed in the process, if you were innocent. And speaking of confession, here's a quick vocabulary lesson. Why wouldn't you want to say this sentence in front of the Medes? Because the word lion sounds like the word assassination. So if you said this sentence, they would think you were plotting to assassinate the king. So never say this sentence. Now, if you did survive all of that, there was still a chance that you could die on your way out of the empire. That's because the Assyrians kept a close watch on their borders. And if anyone snuck across without permission, the border patrol, or to use their intimidating name, the horse soldiers, would hunt them down. These guys patrolled the border day and night, and if they caught you, they would drag you back to the empire and probably put you to death. In fact, it was common for them to ride through villages at night to make sure no one was hiding there. If they suspected someone was hiding there, they would blindfold them and take them into the desert. Then they would ask them questions about where they came from and why they left the empire. If they thought your answers were unsatisfactory, then you were doomed. The horse soldiers weren't just ruthless, they were also extremely thorough. They developed a way to track people by the size of their footprints. And if they caught you, they would also cut off your nose and ears to punish you. And yes, that's the same story that we heard in the Bible about the Israelites. But don't worry, it's not the last time we'll talk about them. Make sure to stay tuned so you don't miss that video. Also, if you are enjoying this series, please hit that subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it. Alright, now that we've established how dangerous it was to cross the border and how suspicious everything was, let's say you decided to stay in the empire. How dangerous would it be then? Well, let's imagine that you decide to travel from Ashur to Nineveh, which is about 350 miles away, and you don't have any chariots, so you decide to walk. But after a few days, you run out of water and it's too hot outside to continue, so you find some shade and fall asleep. Now when you wake up, you start walking again, but soon you feel a sharp pain in your leg and you look down to see that you have no idea where you are. You can't remember if you stayed at a wagon post last night or if you walked past one. And to make matters worse, you can't remember if you were supposed to walk towards the sun or keep following the road. Now chances are if you crossed paths with another person, they would have pointed you in the right direction. But since you haven't seen anyone, you're lost in the desert. Without knowing exactly where you are or which way you're supposed to be going, you're pretty much doomed. There's no road signs and the landscape looks the same everywhere. Plus, with no water and no way to get more, you're probably only going to last a few more hours. Even if you did spot a road in the distance, the chances of you making it there are slim to none because the terrain is mostly flat and there is nothing to mark where the road starts, so you won't know if you're walking in the right direction or not. Chances are you will walk in circles for hours until you're too weak to continue and succumb to the heat. As you can see, whether you were inside or outside the Assyrian Empire, it was hard to survive there. Thanks for watching. Remember to hit that subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this. Also, if you want to learn more about the Assyrian Empire, we have links to some great resources in the description below. Until next time. Assyria, a cruel empire that practiced genocide and slavery. But it wasn't enough for them to conquer just one region or one city. They wanted to rule the whole world. And to do this, they assembled an army so large that today no one could even imagine how people back then were able to handle such a huge force. Today we will talk about their unmatched fighting strength, weapons and tactics. But first, we have to understand how Assyria came up with the idea of creating the largest army in the world, and why they needed it. To do that, let's go back to the beginning of their existence. Assyria was an empire located in what is now northern Iraq and parts of Syria and Turkey. It is believed that the Assyrians were one of the first people to settle in Mesopotamia after the Great Flood, which is mentioned in the Bible and other ancient texts. This happened around 2000 BC. The Assyrians were not only good at growing crops and raising livestock like most settlers, but they were also excellent fighters who used chariots and horses to attack their neighbors and take away their food. Over time, they grew in power and influence until eventually forming a strong kingdom. In 911 BC, a king named Ashurnasirpal II came into power, and he became known throughout the region for his ruthless military campaigns. During his reign, he conquered many lands and subjugated several city-states, including many in present-day Turkey. He was also responsible for inventing siege towers, a new type of chariot, and was the first to use iron weapons on the battlefield. These advancements helped him defeat many enemies and gain control over vast territories. After his death, his son, Shalmaneser III, took over and continued his father's legacy. He went on to conquer many more cities and expand the Assyrian Empire even further. But it was during his reign that the empire reached its peak. At the time, the entire Middle East was divided into two halves. On one side was the Assyrian Empire, and on the other side was the Neo-Kingdom of Israel. Between these two powers was a small country called Aram, which had been a vassal state of Assyria since the days of Ashurnasirpal II. However, after Shalmaneser III came to power, Aram became discontented with Assyrian rule and rebelled against them. This rebellion alarmed Shalmaneser because if left unchecked, it could grow into something much bigger. So he assembled an army and marched on Aram to put down the revolt. But what happened next shocked him. When his troops approached Aram, they found out that the country had been completely abandoned. There was not a single person anywhere. At first, he thought that everyone had fled into the mountains or forest. But soon he realized that something else was going on here. He found some villages where animals had been slaughtered and left to rot. He also found fields where crops had been burnt and destroyed. In some places, he found bodies of men, women and children who had been tortured before being killed. As Shalmaneser continued his march across Aram, he found more evidence of this mysterious massacre. Entire cities seemed to have been wiped off the face of the earth. No one was left alive in any of them. After finally retaking the capital city, Shalmaneser discovered that his suspicions were correct. A small group of rebels had managed to steal a large amount of iron from one of the local forges and used it to create iron weapons. Then they attacked the villagers and forced them to flee. In the end, Aram had been depopulated by these rebels, leaving behind a ghost country that nobody lived in anymore. This event terrified Shalmaneser because if Aram could be depopulated in just a few years, What would stop him from suffering the same fate? He knew that the secret behind the success of the rebels from Aram lay in their organization and discipline. So upon returning home, he started making changes to the Assyrian army to make it more effective. He created a professional standing army that was larger than any other nation in the region, and instead of relying on chariots like most other armies at the time, Shalmaneser focused on developing infantry tactics and formations. Under his leadership, the Assyrian army became one of the most powerful fighting forces in the ancient world. After his death, his son, King Ashurbanipal, took the empire to even greater heights. He is believed to have ruled over an area that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Under his reign, the Assyrians developed new weapons and tactics and became known for their brutality and ruthlessness in battle. But despite all their power and might, the empire would eventually collapse due to internal strife and external pressures. And although they are often remembered as a brutal and violent people, there is much more to the story that most people don't know about. Now let's get back to the video. If you were alive during the Assyrian Empire, you wouldn't last a day in their army, let alone a battle. But what makes them so strong? First, we need to look at the sheer numbers involved. In 672 BC, King Esarhaddon assembled a massive army of 120,000 soldiers to fight against the Egyptian pharaoh. This force consisted of foot soldiers, charioteers, cavalrymen, and archers. We can only imagine the size of the army when it was led by Ashurbanipal, the greatest king of the empire, because he claimed that he once led an army of over 500,000 soldiers. Assyrian soldiers were well trained, disciplined, and equipped with advanced weaponry. They fought in tight formations using spears, swords, bows, and arrows. Chariots were also a common sight on the battlefield, allowing the Assyrians to move quickly and strike their enemies with speed and accuracy. They were also known for their use of siege engines, including catapults and battering rams, which they used to break through enemy defenses and capture cities. The Assyrians were also masters of psychological warfare, using intimidation and fear to break the will of their enemies. They often painted their bodies in terrifying ways and wore helmets that resembled the heads of wild animals. Even more impressive than the size of the Assyrian army was their ability to sustain it. The empire was highly organized and efficient, with a strong economy that provided the resources necessary to support a large military force. The Assyrians also had a system of roads and supply depots that allowed them to move troops and supplies quickly and easily. They also used propaganda to bolster their fighting strength. Throughout their history, many neighboring countries had rebelled against Assyrian rule. To prevent future revolts, the kings of Assyria would build monuments in the cities they conquered, glorifying their own strength and intimidating the locals so that no one would ever try to rebel again. One of the most famous examples of these monuments is the so-called Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III. It stands 2.7 meters high and almost 1 meter wide. Carved into its surface are 28 lines depicting military exploits of the king. Each line shows a group of people holding gifts and treasures and kneeling before the king. The inscriptions on the obelisk include the names of conquered cities and countries and the tribute they paid. Also depicted on the obelisk are prisoners of war taken by Shalmaneser during his campaigns against the Philistines, Phoenicians, and Syrians. And in the center of the obelisk, there is a group of 35 people who seem to be the leaders of the conquered nations. There is another monument in Nimrud, which was built by Ashurnasirpal II and has 11 vertical lines. Each line shows the king receiving tribute from a defeated enemy. The inscription mentions more than 40 countries that were subdued by Ashurnasirpal. The final line shows the king smiting his enemies as they flee before him. However, these monuments didn't always work, and sometimes the Assyrians had to resort to more extreme measures to keep the population under control. One of the most brutal examples of this occurred in the city of Babylon in 689 BC, when King Sennacherib of Assyria invaded and conquered the city. According to the Bible, Sennacherib boasted about his victory in Babylon and claimed that he killed 1,700,000 people, dragged 100 talents of gold, and took captive 200 talents of silver. But perhaps even more horrifying than the destruction of Babylon was the treatment of its inhabitants. Sennacherib is said to have flayed 700 young men and women alive, set others on fire, and made a stew out of their flesh. He then hung the meat in stalls to eat as sashimi. Although many stories about the Assyrians sound like legends, they were actually quite realistic and show us just how brutal and merciless this empire could be. Perhaps that's why the very mention of Assyria evokes fear and horror even in modern times. Why you wouldn't survive a day in the Assyrian Empire? Assyria was one of the most powerful empires of its time, and it was able to conquer many nations around it, including Israel. But did you know that the Assyrians were also known for their incredible skills in crafts and trades? Today we're going to take a look at some of the most skilled craftsmen of the ancient world, and find out why you would last a day in the Assyrian Empire. So stay tuned until the end of this video, because we'll show you why this empire is worth exploring further. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. Here are 20 facts about the Assyrians that you didn't know. Before we get into the facts, let's look at the title of this video. Why would someone not survive a day in the Assyrian Empire? It all has to do with labor laws or lack thereof. The Assyrians didn't believe in unions or workers' rights. They believed that everyone should work when they could, whether they wanted to or not. This included women, children, and even slaves. There were no rules against working someone to death. In fact, it was encouraged. If a worker couldn't keep up with the demands of his job, he would be replaced with another slave or member of his family who could work harder. That's right, the Assyrians were all about that hustle life. No time off for them, not even for death. Imagine being so overworked you drop dead from exhaustion, and then your boss just shrugs and says, "Oh well, it's not my fault you're too weak." The Assyrians would have said that. But how did these super strict labor laws affect the way the Assyrians lived? Well, for starters, it made them really efficient, because everyone was working all the time. They were able to get a lot done. In fact, they built some of the most impressive cities of their day. But it also meant that there was a lot of resentment among the workers. Many of them hated their jobs and the fact that they had no control over their lives. This resentment eventually led to several rebellions, but they were all put down with extreme prejudice. The Assyrians weren't messing around when it came to keeping their empire together. They will literally kill anyone who threatens their way of life. Let us take a look at some of the most skilled craftsmen of the Assyrian Empire, and see how they might have fared under these tough working conditions. A blacksmith is a skilled worker who makes things out of metal. Blacksmithing is a trade that has been around for centuries, and it is still practiced today. In ancient Assyria, blacksmiths were highly skilled craftsmen who were responsible for making weapons, tools, and other metal objects. They worked in small shops or in government-run workshops where they would be given metals to work with. They would use their skills to create objects that were not only useful, but also beautiful works of art. The Assyrians were known for their intricate and detailed metalwork, and their blacksmiths played a key role in this reputation. These skilled workers would often be employed by the military to make weapons such as swords, spears, and shields. They would also make tools for farmers and other workers, as well as decorative items for the wealthy elite. To become a blacksmith in ancient Assyria, one needed to be apprenticed to a master blacksmith and learn the trade through years of experience. It was a difficult and dangerous job, but it was also one that was highly respected. Blacksmiths were seen as essential to the economy and the well-being of society, and they were rewarded with high salaries and access to luxury goods. However, despite their importance, blacksmiths were also subject to the same harsh labor laws as any other worker in ancient Assyria. They were expected to work long hours for little pay, and they had no rights to complain or bargain for better conditions. If a blacksmith was not able to meet the demands of his employer, he would be punished severely, sometimes even put to death. Despite these harsh conditions, the blacksmiths of ancient Assyria continued to produce some of the most exquisite metalwork in the ancient world. Their skill and craftsmanship were truly remarkable, and they left behind a legacy that has lasted for centuries. But what about the lowly peasant? How did they fare under the Assyrians' tough labor laws? In ancient Assyria, peasants were the backbone of the economy, but they were also the lowest class in society. They were expected to work long hours for little pay, and they had no rights or freedoms. But how exactly did the Assyrians control their workforce? The Assyrians used a combination of force and coercion to keep the peasants working. They maintained a standing army that was used to put down any rebellions, and they also had a secret police force that spied on the peasants and reported any suspicious activity. But perhaps the most effective way the Assyrians controlled their workers was through propaganda. They created a system of mass media that glorified hard work and obedience, and demonized laziness and disobedience. The peasants had no choice but to listen to this propaganda, which was broadcast through posters, pamphlets, and public speeches. But what if you were a peasant and you just didn't want to work anymore? What options did you have? You could try to run away, but that was risky because the Assyrians had a strict law that allowed soldiers to kill any runaway worker on sight. You could also try to hide, but the Assyrian secret police were everywhere. and eventually they would find you and drag you back to work. Or you could just give in and accept your fate. The Assyrians believed that hard work and obedience were the only way to live. So if you didn't want to work, you were basically a second-class citizen. The Assyrians believed that all citizens should work hard and obey the laws of the empire. They saw hard work as a virtue and obedience as a way to maintain order and stability in society. Those who did not work hard or obey the rules were seen as lazy and rebellious, and they were punished severely. We hope you enjoyed learning about the Assyrians and their amazing empire. These skilled craftsmen were truly talented, and their work is a testament to their skill and craftsmanship. We also hope you learned about the harsh working conditions that they faced and the lengths to which the Assyrian rulers went to control their workforce. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode, and we'll see you next time. Hi, everyone. I've been getting a lot of comments and emails recently asking me to make a video about ancient Assyria, and today we're going to talk about 3 reasons why you wouldn't survive a day in the Assyrian Empire. But before we get into it, let's see what interesting facts you missed about the Assyrians in our last video. Comment below with your answers. The first person who guesses correctly gets 500 points. Now back to the topic at hand. Assyria was a Mesopotamian kingdom located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, modern-day Iraq, northern parts of Syria, Turkey, and Iran. Its history goes all the way back to the 25th century BCE. But the empire most people refer to when they talk about Assyria is the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which rose to power around the 9th century BCE. It reached its peak during the reigns of Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, and Sargon II. Together, they conquered huge parts of Western Asia, including the former Assyrian heartland, northern Mesopotamia, and even parts of Anatolia and the Levant. As such, the Assyrians became masters of long-distance trade routes that connected them with civilizations like the Israelites, the Egyptians, and the Greeks. By the 7th century BCE, however, the Assyrian Empire had already fallen, and although there are some debates regarding the exact causes, one thing is clear: the once mighty army of Assyria collapsed due to internal and external pressures. But back to the main topic of this video. Here are 3 reasons why you wouldn't survive a day in the Assyrian Empire. Number 1. It was extremely dangerous for foreigners. Ancient Assyria wasn't exactly a melting pot of cultures. In fact, most non-Assyrian people were considered outsiders. As you can imagine, being an outsider in a country where you don't speak the language and customs are very different from what you're used to can be pretty difficult. Picture yourself dropped off in the middle of Baghdad without knowing anyone or speaking Arabic. That's kind of how foreigners felt when they entered Assyria. Imagine trying to communicate with locals who barely understand your broken version of Aramaic, the lingua franca of the region. They might think you're a foreigner from somewhere else. Chances are they'd just point towards the nearest exit. If you were really unlucky, they'd lead you straight into the arms of the secret police. We have evidence that Assyria had a secret police force tasked with identifying and arresting spies. In 705 BCE, the king of Babylon sent his son to Ashur to spy on the city. The kid made it all the way to the royal court before he was caught. He was then interrogated by the secret police, tortured, and executed. So if you were a foreigner and someone caught you sneaking into the country, chances of you surviving the interrogation are slim to none. But it wasn't only dangerous for spies. Ordinary people weren't safe either. Throughout the empire, there were various local rebellions against the Assyrians because they weren't exactly known for their kindness. In fact, they had a reputation for being brutal and ruthless. At one point, they even put a price on the head of Isaiah, a Jewish prophet. So if you were a foreigner and you didn't fit in, you were probably dead meat. No. 2. Slavery was widespread and could happen to anyone. In ancient Assyria, slavery was not only allowed, it was encouraged. There were slaves throughout the empire, and every Assyrian family seemed to have at least one. The Assyrians believed that owning slaves was a sign of wealth and power, and no one was safe from being captured and sold into slavery. When the Assyrians conquered a new city, they usually left a small garrison behind to make sure the locals didn't rebel. These garrisons would often confiscate property from the citizens and enslave them or their children. Most slaves in Assyria were acquired through warfare. However, some slaves came from within the empire itself. One of the most infamous examples was the enslavement of the Kingdom of Israel. In 720 BCE, the Assyrians destroyed the Kingdom of Israel and took many of its citizens, including craftsmen and skilled laborers, to Assyria as slaves. So even if you managed to escape the secret police and the angry mobs of Assyria, there is always the chance that you could be captured in battle and end up working the rest of your life for free. In fact, there's a good chance that you'll be killed on the battlefield. Even though the Assyrians aren't as famous for their military prowess as the Egyptians or Romans, they were still a major power in the ancient world, and their military campaigns took them all over Western Asia. If you were a soldier in the Assyrian army, you'd have to fight in battles on a regular basis. But the thing is, most soldiers didn't die on the battlefield. According to statistics, most of them died because of diseases and illnesses. That's right. Being a soldier in the Assyrian army was more dangerous for your health than for your life. You see, ancient Assyria didn't have the same medical knowledge as we do today. Plus, soldiers had to carry all their supplies with them, which included their food. So when soldiers went out into the wilderness for months at a time, they often ended up eating spoiled or contaminated food. To make things worse, these soldiers slept in the open, so they were exposed to the elements. This led to outbreaks of disease and illness, which claimed more lives than battles. So if you were a soldier in the Assyrian army, you had a greater chance of dying from a fever than from a sword wound. No, 3. The punishments were brutal. You've heard Billie Eilish's song about it. But what exactly was the Iron Maiden of Nimrod? Well, it's not exactly known. Historians have found several human-shaped devices made of iron in the ruins of Nimrod, the ancient capital of Assyria. However, there's no consensus on what they were actually used for. Some scholars believe they were used as torture devices, while others believe they were simply a form of punishment. However, there's also the possibility that they were both. Whatever the case may be, it's likely that the Iron Maidens of Nimrod were used to punish criminals and traitors. You see, ancient Assyria didn't have a formal legal system. Instead, justice was often meted out on a case-by-case basis. The king or a local governor would hear a case and decide the punishment. This meant that there was a lot of room for abuse. Sometimes the punishment for a crime could be as severe as death. And when it comes to crimes, Assyria wasn't messing around. If you committed a crime in ancient Assyria, you could be thrown in prison. If you were guilty, you'd be given a punishment that fit the crime. For example, if you stole something, you could be put to death. If you murdered someone, you could be put to death. And if you rebelled against the king, you could definitely be put to death. The Assyrians believed that the king was chosen by the gods, so rebelling against him was tantamount to rebelling against the gods themselves. But it wasn't only criminals who were at risk of being punished. Sometimes entire cities were punished for crimes committed by their leaders. For example, in 663 BCE, the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal invaded the kingdom of Elam after the Elamites supported a rebellion against him. He captured the capital city of Susa and burned it to the ground. So if you lived in a city that was conquered by the Assyrians, you could be punished even if you did nothing wrong. And this brings us to the final reason why you wouldn't survive a day in the Assyrian Empire: the destruction of the empire. The Assyrian Empire lasted for centuries, but eventually it fell apart, and you wouldn't want to be around when that happened. In 612 BCE, the Assyrian capital of Nineveh was sacked by the Medes and Babylonians. The sacking of Nineveh is known as the Last Light of Nineveh, and it marked the end of the Assyrian Empire. The city was looted and burned, and many of its inhabitants were killed or enslaved. This event had a profound impact on the course of history. It led to the rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire and paved the way for the conquest of the Near East by the Persians. So if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, you could have been caught up in the sack of Nineveh and killed or enslaved. In conclusion, ancient Assyria was a brutal and unforgiving place. From the ruthless secret police to the angry mobs, the constant threat of war and the brutal punishments, there was no room for error. The destruction of the empire was also a violent and chaotic time that you wouldn't want to be around. So count yourself lucky. You never ended up in the Assyrian Empire. And now it's time for the bonus fact. Do you know who defeated the Assyrians to bring an end to their empire? Write your answer in the comments. The first 5 people to do so will receive 1,000 points each. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and join us next time for more videos like these.